They came with shovels, not soldiers, not mourners, just neighbors, ordinary men and women with the quiet conviction of ritual. One by one, they dug straight, neat graves in the outskirts of their town. No disease had spread, no armies had marched through, only a silence so thick it seemed to press against their chests, and a voice in their heads telling them that Judgment Day had arrived. Children watched from doorways, elders mumbled prayers, dogs whimpered, and then without hesitation, the people lay down inside the shallow soil, covering themselves with their hands, with courage and terror tangled together. Nobody questioned, nobody screamed, they simply obeyed. By morning, the town was empty, yet full of the living and the buried. The earth swallowed their certainty. The question remained, who or what had convinced an entire town to bury themselves alive? No one outside the town knew what had happened at first. Letters went unanswered. Traders passing through reported empty streets, doors wide open, food left to rot on tables. And then came the stories from the few who had survived or had not been present that day. The first account spoke of a voice, not audible, yet commanding. People described a sudden compulsion, a shared certainty that the world had ended, and the only salvation was beneath the soil. It began in whispers. "It is time," one villager muttered. Others nodded as if hearing the words inside their own minds. No argument, no hesitation. Some who tried to flee found themselves inexplicably returning to the center of the town, shovels in hand, as if drawn by an invisible force stronger than fear or reason. Families dug side by side, their movements mechanical, ritualistic. Mothers guided children into the graves, and fathers lowered themselves beside them. The work was tireless, precise, almost ceremonial. Each mound became a marker of obedience. The local priest, a man known for his stubborn skepticism, joined last, muttering scriptures, though his eyes betrayed confusion and terror. Every soul seemed caught in a trance, guided by a belief too profound to question. By noon, rows of freshly turned earth stretched beyond the eye, an unnatural cemetery forming in the heart of a living town. Yet no one screamed. Not a single shout pierced the eerie quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though the world itself had been silenced to witness what was unfolding. Neighbors who had previously quarreled, who had bickered over property, livestock, or petty grievances, now worked side by side with a unified purpose. Even the local blacksmith, usually loud and defiant, knelt beside a grave and lowered himself in silence. Some later described feeling an unshakable calm, a conviction that to lie in the earth was to be spared from an impending doom that no one could define. Others reported hallucinations, a fleeting sense of light breaking through the sky, a whisper of voices calling from distant horizons, but all led them back to the dug soil. It was as if their own minds had conspired to guide them, to surrender before the final hour arrived. By evening, the town had completed its self-imposed burial. One by one, individuals lay down and pulled the soil over themselves. The act was methodical, unhurried, as if each person knew precisely when to stop moving, when to close their eyes, when to surrender to what they believed was inevitable. Some trembled, some wept silently, but none resisted. Those outside would later call it madness, hysteria, collective psychosis, but inside, the participants described clarity, a terrifying clarity that left no room for doubt. They had become both grave diggers and the buried architects of their own final resting places. When the sun finally set, the town appeared abandoned, yet alive with an invisible presence. The graves were fresh, the soil pressed down with hands and knees, yet there was no sound, no struggle, no evidence of panic. It was perfection in obedience, a communal ritual performed with terrifying precision. The world outside continued, ignorant of the silence, oblivious to the tragedy etched into the earth. The few survivors who stumbled across the town weeks later could barely comprehend what they saw. Neat rows of graves stretching endlessly, each a testament to a collective faith so absolute that it had consumed every life within its borders. And as historians would later puzzle over diaries and fragments recovered from the outskirts, one detail persisted. None of the notes mentioned a reason. No plague, no war, no prophecy, just a certainty, a conviction shared silently, invisibly, driving an entire population to dig graves for themselves and lie within. The question lingers: how does a whole town surrender their lives without a single audible command? And more chilling, what unseen force can instill obedience so absolute that death becomes not feared but sought? The days following the town's mass burial revealed an unsettling pattern. For weeks, travelers avoided the area, reporting not just the rows of freshly turned soil, but an almost tangible presence, as if the town itself was watching. Birds refused to perch on fences. Dogs whimpered and fled. Those who dared step into the central square described a sensation of being observed, though no eyes met theirs. The earth seemed to pulse beneath their feet, and a low hum, almost imperceptible, carried from the graves, vibrating through the souls of anyone walking nearby. Historians piecing together fragments of letters, journals, and merchant accounts found hints of a deeper, darker current that had gripped the town long before the shovels touched the soil. Decades prior, a series of unexplained disappearances had occurred, each victim vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic messages etched in walls or whispered among neighbors. Scholars speculated that a tradition older than memory had embedded itself in the town's psyche, a cultic memory passed down through generations. And while no single document described a ritual commanding burial alive, there were repeated references to listening to the earth, to joining the soil before it claims you. Perhaps it was superstition, perhaps madness, but the culmination had been catastrophic. Eyewitness accounts that survived by chance painted a portrait of eerie unanimity. One trader, passing days before the mass burial, recalled seeing villagers walking in silence, shovels slung across shoulders, faces vacant yet focused. Children carried small spades, following elders without question. Even the town's animals, normally restless, moved as if part of a solemn procession. In hushed tones, villagers spoke of a day without sun or shadow, a time when judgment would descend, and to resist was to invite annihilation. They believed collectively that surrender to the earth was salvation. Psychologists analyzing these behaviors centuries later suggested it was an extreme case of shared delusion, amplified by isolation, fear, and ancient rituals encoded into the town's cultural memory. Yet the intensity of the obedience defied logic. The villagers were not coerced by violence or threat. They acted voluntarily, almost reverently. Those who attempted to flee were either persuaded by silent compulsion or simply returned, as if the act of digging had become a gravitational force impossible to resist. It was a perfect storm of belief, community pressure, and perhaps something beyond understanding. The act itself was methodical. Graves were dug in symmetrical patterns, forming concentric circles that expanded across fields and into the outskirts. Parents lowered themselves beside children. Friends lay side by side, faces pale but calm. Each mound was covered carefully, layer by layer, until only the tops remained. Those who survived long enough to describe it recalled that the villagers did not scream, did not struggle. Instead, a strange serenity had descended. One witness who watched from a nearby ridge swore he saw the villagers' eyes close with a kind of peaceful resignation, as if stepping into the soil was the most natural act in the world. Letters left behind by the town's few literate citizens hinted at a psychological transformation, almost spiritual. They wrote of visions of light and shadow, voices not spoken aloud, and a sense of inevitability so profound that resisting it felt like fighting the wind itself. It was as though the earth had called to them personally, whispering promises that the living could not resist. And when the act was completed, when every man, woman, and child had lain in the soil, a silence fell. A silence so complete that even the forest seemed to hold its breath. When outsiders finally entered the town, weeks later, they reported an unsettling quiet. Graves stretched in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Tools lay scattered, still warm from labor. Personal belongings rested atop the soil as though placed there with care. There were no bodies in sight, yet every mound had the distinct shape of a human form beneath. Scholars who examined these records wrestled with the impossible. An entire population had coordinated their own deaths without coercion, without chaos, without any clear explanation. Some proposed collective hysteria, others the influence of some unknown psychological contagion. But no explanation fully captured the precision, the obedience, the eerie calm that had enveloped the town. The question remained haunting. How does a human mind, multiplied across hundreds, arrive at a decision so absolute, so irreversible? And more chillingly, if such surrender could grip one town, could it happen again, somewhere else in another generation, under the right conditions? Earth had claimed the town once, yet the story, whispered through letters, journals, and fragmented testimony, suggested that the seeds of such surrender might lie dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken again. As the story of the town spread, curiosity turned to fear. Travelers spoke in hushed voices of a place where the living had surrendered to the earth without struggle, where the boundaries between obedience and death had blurred into something incomprehensible. Investigators who ventured there recorded details that were almost impossible to reconcile. The graves were perfectly aligned, forming a geometric pattern that suggested planning beyond casual human effort. Some theorized that the town had been practicing a ritual for generations, its purpose obscured by time, a collective memory that surfaced in the final act. Others whispered of darker forces, of a compulsion not merely psychological, but supernatural, something invisible, pervasive, capable of bending human will toward a singular, terrifying outcome. Inside the town itself, the process had begun long before the first shovelful of dirt. Villagers reported hearing a silence unlike any other, a cessation of ordinary sounds, leaving only the pulse of the earth beneath their feet. Conversations became monosyllabic, gestures deliberate. Children mimicked adults without question. Even animals seemed to sense the impending inevitability, huddling close or disappearing entirely. Those who attempted to resist found themselves inexplicably drawn back to the graves, their limbs heavy, their thoughts muddled by a compulsion they could not name. It was as if the town itself had become a single organism, each citizen a cell compelled to follow a hidden directive. Eyewitness accounts revealed that the villagers treated their work with reverence. Graves were dug in exact dimensions, spaced evenly, lined with stones or wooden planks in some cases. Hands became calloused from endless shoveling, yet no one abandoned the task. The act of digging was simultaneously a labor and a meditation, an enactment of belief that had no need for words. Elders whispered that the soil itself spoke, instructing each person in gestures that transcended language. And as the sun climbed higher, the town's rhythm accelerated. One by one, villagers lowered themselves into the earth, moving with mechanical precision. There was no panic, no screaming, only the calm certainty that what they were doing was necessary and perhaps sacred. Scholars examining fragments of diaries discovered recurring motifs, references to visions of light and darkness, whispers from the soil, and a day without sun appeared repeatedly. One diary entry, written by a young girl, described seeing the entire town moving as though in a trance, shovels raised, eyes fixed on the soil with devotion. She wrote, "It calls us. We must go down, or it will take us by force. There is peace beneath." These words, simple yet chilling, hinted at a belief system that combined fear, faith, and a hypnotic devotion to ritual. There were no leaders directing the mass burial, no one forcing compliance. Instead, obedience spread like a contagion, each villager reinforcing the certainty of the other. Medical historians have since debated the psychological implications. Some suggest a form of mass psychogenic illness, amplified by isolation and shared belief. Others argue that what occurred was beyond mere psychology, a collective surrender to an unknown force, internal or external, whose power defied comprehension. Survivors from neighboring towns recalled hearing the villagers speak of signs, a silence in the wind, shadows that moved without source, voices that echoed within the mind rather than the ear. These phenomena were dismissed at the time as superstition, yet when viewed alongside the meticulous execution of the burials, they suggest a phenomenon so profound it transcended rational explanation. One particularly haunting account comes from a traveling merchant who arrived just as the last villagers descended into their graves. He described the moment with precision. "I saw them kneel, one by one, and lower themselves. No one resisted. Their faces were pale, their eyes closed, and yet they smiled. I ran to call for help, but when I looked back, they had vanished beneath the soil, and the wind carried a hush so deep I feared speaking." He fled the town, never to return, but his testimony, along with fragments from letters and surviving artifacts, forms the backbone of our understanding. The meticulousness of the burial raised further questions. Graves were not random. Their alignment formed patterns reminiscent of ancient geomantic designs, circles and lines that suggested symbolism lost to memory. Perhaps the town had been following instructions from generations past, a ritual passed down orally, its meaning obscured but its execution unwavering. Or perhaps the pattern was accidental, a byproduct of collective human behavior under extraordinary influence. Either explanation seems inadequate when considering the precision, the coordination, and the eerie calm of the participants. As the town disappeared beneath the soil, the surrounding environment seemed to react. Forests remained unnaturally still, rivers flowed silently, and even the wildlife appeared to avoid the area. A faint hum, almost imperceptible, emanated from the ground, recorded by the few outsiders who dared approach. Some claimed that if one listened closely, whispers could be heard, soft, indecipherable, compelling. Was it memory? Was it madness? Or was it the lingering presence of the villagers themselves communicating from beneath the earth? And so the town became a cautionary tale, a place where human certainty, compounded by shared belief, had led to mass surrender. It is a story that continues to disturb because it is neither explained nor fully understood. The graves remain a silent testament to the force of conviction, to the power of ritual, and to the fragility of the human mind when confronted by the unknown. We are left with the unsettling realization that an entire community could dig its own graves and lie down without coercion, guided by an invisible certainty that we may never comprehend. The question lingers, louder than any answer. What drives ordinary humans to accept such finality? What unseen forces, internal or external, could bend minds so completely? And most chillingly, if this could happen once, could it happen again? Somewhere else under the right circumstances? Waiting to awaken in another generation? Weeks after the town vanished beneath its own soil, investigators began to piece together fragments of the final day. Scattered tools, abandoned personal belongings, and shallow impressions in the earth told a story of eerie order. Each grave was measured, aligned, and covered with deliberate care, suggesting that even in surrender, the villagers maintained discipline. Witnesses from neighboring areas spoke of strange behavior leading up to the mass burial. Villagers walking in unison, carrying shovels as though part of a procession, faces pale but resolute, eyes fixed on invisible points in the distance. Survivors who had escaped or been absent recalled the compulsion that gripped the town. It was not a voice in the air, but a voice inside their minds, commanding attention, instilling certainty. People who resisted even momentarily found themselves inexplicably drawn back, as if unseen hands guided them to continue digging. Some reported visions, the ground pulsing beneath their feet, shadows stretching unnaturally, whispers in the silence, the air thick with a presence no human could explain. Psychologists studying the phenomenon centuries later referred to it as a combination of collective hysteria, extreme social cohesion, and suggestibility. But these explanations barely scratch the surface. The precision of the burials, the calm obedience, in the absence of panic, suggested something deeper. The villagers seemed to experience a clarity that eclipsed fear, a belief so absolute that surrendering to the soil became a rational, even desirable act. The town's rituals were meticulous. Graves were spaced evenly, tools arranged neatly, hands pressed into soil with care. Families descended together, parents guiding children, friends lying side by side. There was no struggle, no frantic resistance, only a quiet, mechanical devotion. Diaries and letters recovered later hinted at visions of light, whispers from the earth, and a day without sun. One fragment from a child's note read, "It calls us. We must go down, or it will take us by force. There is peace beneath." The simplicity of the statement belied its chilling weight, revealing the depth of psychological surrender that had gripped the town. Merchants, travelers, and curious onlookers who approached afterward described a silence so complete it seemed unnatural. Even the wind appeared suspended. Rivers flowed without sound, and wildlife avoided the area. Some claimed to hear faint hums or whispers emanating from the graves, a lingering echo of the town's obedience. Others noted that the geometric alignment of the graves resembled forgotten ritualistic designs, circles and lines suggesting intent and symbolism lost to history. The unnerving reality remains. No one forced these people. No armies, no violence, no external threat coerced their actions. They acted of their own volition, drawn by belief, compulsion, or something beyond comprehension. They became gravediggers and the buried architects of their own demise, leaving behind a town erased yet eternally present in memory and soil. The haunting implication is unavoidable. If an entire town could surrender so completely, guided by unseen certainty, what prevents another town or another generation from experiencing the same compulsion? And if the force was not merely psychological, what does it say about the invisible currents that shape human behavior in moments we think we understand? The silence of the grave speaks louder than any explanation, leaving only a question. Can certainty, amplified across a community, become stronger than life itself? Decades later, the town's story continued to ripple through history. Scholars and travelers debated the nature of the compulsion that had gripped the villagers. Some argued it was purely psychological, a case of mass delusion, amplified by isolation, shared belief, and cultural memory. Others whispered of a darker possibility, that an unseen force, something beyond human comprehension, had swept through the town, bending wills as effortlessly as a river carves a canyon. Fragments of diaries and recovered letters painted a haunting picture. Villagers had spoken of hearing the earth itself, of whispers that resonated inside their minds, guiding each shovel into the soil, each body into its grave. One entry, penned by a young woman, read, "I feel the soil calling. It is patient. It is just. We must obey." There was no fear in her words, only acceptance. Another entry noted, "The children follow, the elders guide. We are one with the earth. There is no turning back." These words, simple yet chilling, conveyed the depth of surrender, a surrender not forced but willingly embraced. Outside observers were struck by the precision of the burial process. Graves were not random. They formed geometric patterns, concentric lines, and symbolic arrangements that suggested planning far beyond ordinary understanding. Tools lay discarded, yet carefully placed. Soil pressed evenly over each figure, leaving no sign of struggle. Even animals in the vicinity behaved as if they understood, avoiding the area entirely. It was as if the town had become a single organism, every individual a part of a larger, inexorable plan. The mystery deepened when investigators examined artifacts left behind. Clothing, personal belongings, and journals were untouched by time or decay, yet the graves remained empty of bodies visible to the surface. Witnesses reported a subtle vibration from beneath the earth, faint hums and whispers that suggested presence, communication, or memory lingering where human life had once been. Some theorized that the town had not merely perished, but had become part of the soil itself, a permanent integration into the world they had so willingly surrendered to. The chilling realization persisted: no violence, no threat, no coercion, only shared certainty. Every villager, from child to elder, had participated with unbroken obedience. Some scholars likened it to hypnosis, others to religious ecstasy taken to an extreme. But all agreed that the human capacity for collective surrender, when paired with unshakable belief, was far greater and far darker than any outside force could have coerced. Even today, the graves remain, undisturbed, a silent testament to the power of certainty and the fragility of the human mind. Travelers who pass by report an unsettling stillness, an invisible weight pressing down from the earth. Whispers linger in the wind, soft and unintelligible, yet impossible to ignore. It is as though the town continues to exist beneath the soil, their obedience eternal, their story a warning etched into the landscape itself. And so the question lingers, haunting and unresolved. What unseen currents can bend an entire community toward a single, irreversible act? How much of our belief is ours, and how much is shaped by forces we cannot see? If a whole town could surrender to certainty once, might it not happen again, elsewhere, in another time when the soil calls and the silence speaks? The town remains buried beneath its own choices, yet it is not gone. Its silence echoes, louder than any voice, a pulse beneath the surface that refuses to fade. Historians, travelers, and curious wanderers who step too close speak of a feeling that cannot be named, an invisible pressure, a knowing that something watches, waits, and remembers. The graves, neat and endless, are a testament not just to obedience, but to the terrifying power of certainty unchallenged. No plague took them, no war destroyed them. They laid themselves down, one by one, drawn by a belief so absolute that life itself became secondary, irrelevant, a fragile thing to be surrendered without hesitation. And in that surrender, they became eternal, their story engraved in soil and memory alike. The silence of the town speaks still to anyone willing or unwilling to listen. Some scholars argue it was psychology. Others whisper of forces older than humanity, guiding minds with unseen hands. Survivors' descendants speak in hushed tones of visions, voices, and compulsion, cautionary tales repeated at night. Travelers report that the wind carries whispers, faint as a heartbeat, as if the town itself hums beneath the earth, reminding the world of its quiet mastery over the living. And yet the most chilling thought is this: the soil does not forget. Conviction once planted is difficult to eradicate. The exact combination of isolation, suggestion, ritual, and fear that gripped that town. Could it not happen again? Somewhere else, tomorrow, in another generation. Perhaps even here now, in subtle currents of belief shaping choices we think are our own. The line between guidance and compulsion is thin, invisible, and relentless. The town's fate is a mirror, a reflection of the power of certainty, of obedience, and of surrender. We are left staring into that mirror, compelled to ask ourselves, what would we do if the earth called to us, quietly, insistently, with an authority beyond reason? Would we resist, or would we too dig and lie down, believing the silence to be truth? And as the wind moves across the abandoned fields, carrying nothing but the weight of earth and memory, one thought remains, echoing endlessly in the mind. The line between life and surrender is thinner than we imagine, and somewhere, perhaps, the earth is waiting for the next town to answer its call.